Mortise installation for grip to grip. During these steps, we are trying to determine the location of the trim and mark the door accordingly. Mark the door. The standard location of the mortise lock is determined by placing the center of the lever of the knob at 36 inches to 39 inches above the finished floor. This is done to place the center of the lever or knob at the center of the lock rail, and most lock rails are centered in this range. As we are talking about grip by grip sets here, you have a little leeway as there is not much of a horizontal cue for a grip handle. The grip can be placed at the high end of this range for ease of use, or if the door is taller. The important item to consider here is that the center of the thumb piece and grip is not the center of the mortise lock body. The center of the thumb piece is 2 3/4 inches down from the center of the lock body, and the top of the grip is approximately 1 inch below the center of the thumb piece. Compare lock, hardware trim, and door conditions. So far we've been talking about the vertical location of the trim. Now we're going to verify that the width is adequate to accept the mortise lock and hardware trim. This should be taken into consideration before the hardware is ordered. If we verify before the door is bored, it will not limit our options. It is important that the trim does not interfere with the doorstop or astragals, and that the trim does not overlap the door panel or glass. This is decided by a combination of the width of the escutcheon and the backside of the mortise lock. It is recommended to measure the width of the vertical stile to ensure that the escutcheon is plumb and square. It is easier to explore our options if we discover a conflict before the door is prepped. Mortise lock cavity. After determining that everything is compatible and the door is marked, we can go ahead and mortise the cavity in the door that will accept the lock body. The door preparatory specification sheet provided with the lock will give you the exact dimensions of the cavity. We recommend using a lock mortising tool as shown, instead of drilling a series of holes and using a chisel to finish. Mortising lock front. After mortising the cavity, we can go ahead and mortise the edge of the door for the lock front. Again, the door preparatory specification sheet will provide all the specific dimensions for the lock front mortise. Cut relief pockets. There's a portion of the 3-pronged latch bolt that travels outside of the lock body. It can be seen on the lock body right at the center of the latch bolt. Once the relief pockets are cut, the latch bolt can retract and return without interference from the lock cavity. Mark face of door. Before we mark the interior and exterior faces of the door, we can cross-check the door preparatory specification sheets with the actual trim and lock mechanism. After verifying that everything matches up properly, the door can be marked for the location and sizes of the holes as shown on the door prep sheets. Check your specification sheets for the correct measurements and mark the door correctly. Make sure that the correct backset is being used. Now that everything is marked correctly, we can go ahead and drill the door. Grip by grip prep. The thumb pieces that operate the latch bolt must be trimmed to the correct length. Take the exterior trim and check the length and mark. Take the interior trim and check the length and mark. Cut the thumb pieces to length so that they will fully engage the mechanism into the bottom of the lock, but will not interfere with the inside wall of the cavity. Before the interior lock trim can be installed, the turn piece shank has to be cut to length. If the shank is left too long, it will interfere with the far side of the cavity, causing the lock to malfunction. The shank should go halfway through the mortise lock body. This ensures solid operation. Check to ensure that it is a clean cut and no shards are left on the end. Ensure that piece is straight and not bent after cutting. Care should be taken to make sure that the face bores are large enough so that the grips, turn pieces, thumb pieces, and knobs can operate freely without any interference from the face of the door. Install the cylinder. Rotate the swing cover so that the cylinder can be placed through the lock trim. Check for the appropriate length. Insert the key halfway into the cylinder so that it can be used as a handle, and carefully thread the cylinder through the lock trim into the lock body. The lock trim does not want to be attached to the door before threading the cylinder into the lock body, as it may interfere with the threading process. If the trim is not attached, it can be moved to allow the cylinder to thread all the way into the lock. The cylinder can be threaded in and out of the lock so that the Rocky Mountain logo is right side up and the cylinder face does not interfere with the swing cover. Tighten the cylinder set screw that is located on the lock front and the edge of the door above the deadbolt. Do not over tighten the set screw. The cylinder is now in the correct location to operate the lock. The second set screw is only used if there is a double cylinder. Attach exterior and interior lock trim. Once the cylinder has been secured, the exterior and interior lock trim can be installed. Make sure that there is no down pressure on the cylinder when clamping. The use of a bar clamp will allow the trim to be held in place until it is aligned in all directions, plumb and working properly. This step should be done before drilling the pilot holes for the escutcheon screws. Check both the interior and the exterior to make sure they line up correctly. It is a good idea at this point to operate the lock through all of the functions with the door open to make sure everything is operating properly. Once the trim is in the correct position and working properly, drill the pilot holes through the escutcheon with a Vicks bit or any other self-centering drill bit. Make sure that the pilot holes are drilled deep enough to accommodate the whole length of the screw. Thread the escutcheon screws through the trim into the pilot holes and tighten to secure the trim to the door. Screw the escutcheon from the top to the bottom to ensure stability. It is a good idea at this point to operate the lock through all of the functions with the door open to make sure everything is operating properly. Install scalp. The finished scalp can be attached to the lock front on the edge of the door. Lock operation. Check all lock operations to ensure that the mortise works properly.